Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to imagine with me for a moment, if you will. There's a room in your house, and in that room are lots of very heavy objects, at least 50 pounds apiece. Also in that room is a small child, about 4 years old. Now you leave the room, as you're imagining, and when you return 30 minutes later, those heavy objects have all been stacked into a great design. Now when you come back, I'd like you to respond here. Do you think the child, 4 years old, stacked those 50-pound plus objects?
No.
No? So what do you think probably happened? What was that?
Someone else did.
Someone else did. I think that's a good idea, and I'd like you to keep that in mind as I tell you today, ladies and gentlemen, we're not alone in the universe, and I can prove it. Have not always been alone on Earth, and we may not be today. Now this is important because whatever was here once could come back. For this, I said I'm going to prove it, and I'm going to prove it with one very specific piece of evidence. As you may have noticed, it is the pyramids. Specifically, the great Egyptian pyramids at Giza, which the ancient Egyptians could not have built alone. Now, who helped them? Could be aliens. Could have been Jason Momoa, he looks like he could probably handle it. Or more likely, some ancient civilization other than the Egyptians that were advanced, such as the Atlanteans possibly. Who it actually was, I don't know. I don't claim to know, but I do know it wasn't just the Egyptians. We know that they couldn't have done this for 3 reasons. Number one, they could not have built them as precisely as they are built. The Egyptians could not have built the pyramids as quickly as they were built, and the Egyptians could not have built the pyramids to last as they have. Now, I'm sure you're all a little bit skeptical, but let's look at what the experts have to say. Ancient Egyptians could not have built the pyramids so precisely. Looking specifically at the Great Pyramid of Giza, for example, it remained the tallest building in the world for 4,000 years. Not until the 20th century was it outclassed in height. As you can see, it's taller than the Statue of Liberty even. The tiny little statue over here is 3 times my height, and yet it is nothing compared to the Great Pyramid of Giza, built 5,000 years ago with 2.3 million stones, each weighing almost 3 tons. Now, how did the ancient Egyptians move all of those? I don't know. But we do know that despite there being 2.3 million stones, each of them was so expertly carved that they all fit together so nicely that not even a single sheet of paper could fit between them. Not a single imperfection was on these 2.3 million stones when it was built. Not only is it an incredible feat, but there are aspects of its construction which were done with technology beyond what we have even today. For example, just one example, there were tubular drills used to drill holes in the granite that is 500 times faster than our fastest diamond-headed drills today. Donald Braun is just one example of a construction expert and archaeologist who has examined these holes, and he's able to tell that the feat was 500 times greater than what we have today. How could the ancient Egyptians have had this sort of technology 5,000 years ago? Unless, of course, it wasn't the ancient Egyptians who built the pyramids. With that in mind, I'd like you to remember the child that was in that room with all those heavy objects. How did the child stack those objects? As you said a moment ago, the child didn't. Just as the ancient Egyptians could not have built the pyramids, someone else must have helped them. But let's say that they did have technology far beyond what we have today, and that they were somehow able to build these pyramids 5,000 years ago. They still couldn't have done it within the time limit. Ancient Egyptians could not have built the pyramids so quickly. According to archaeologists Dr. Mark Lenner and Dr. Zahi Hawass, who is the former Egyptian Minister of State Antiquity and Affairs, along with many other archaeologists, these two are just two of the most notable and reputable archaeologists in the business, it would have taken the Egyptians 20 to 40,000 people about 30 years to build the Pyramid of Giza alone. Now, despite it taking 20 to 40,000 people about 30 years, even assuming they had the technology to do it, which they couldn't have 5,000 years ago, these same archaeologists have confirmed that there were only 10,000 people working less than 20 years. Now, with the previous estimate of 30 years, they would have had to lay one of these 2.3 million 3-ton stones once every 2.5 minutes. And yet we have just cut their workforce down by more than half and their time by more than a third. And yet they continue to exist. How is that possible? Unless it wasn't the ancient Egyptians building this 5,000 years ago, someone else did. Now, the Egyptians, as we can see, could not have built the pyramids, not in the time span they had, not with the accuracy with which it was done, but they're still here. And not only are they here, they're still here 5,000 years after they were built. The Egyptians couldn't have done that either. The Egyptians could not have built the pyramids to last. Now, we have two pieces of evidence for this. First of all is ancient evidence, second is modern evidence. Around the world, there have been thousands of pyramids built, and yet of them, almost all of them are in ruins. And almost all of them were built within the last millennia that we even still have ruins left to look at. And yet these pyramids built 5,000 years ago still stand when the more recent, more modern constructions have already fallen to dust. Now, not only ancient pyramid builders couldn't figure this out, but modern pyramid builders, if there were any, couldn't figure it out. Steve Burrows is one example of a modern architect who worked on the construction for the, I can't think of the word Olympics, but he worked on the construction for the Olympics in Beijing, and he's just one example of many architects today who say, as you can see here, if you asked us to build something today and you wanted it to last for 5,000 years, then we think you've gone crazy. How could we possibly do that? Modern architects cannot figure out how something could have been built to last 5,000 years. Now, despite the modern architects' doubt and despite the failures of past architects, these pyramids are still here. Now, how could they remain? They shouldn't be able to remain unless we as humanity and the Egyptians didn't build them by ourselves. What I provided here today is indisputable proof that the Egyptians could not have built the pyramids, not so accurately, with such amazing precision and such tools that far surpass what we have even today. Things that would have been difficult with modern cranes and tubular drills, as you saw, was done 5,000 years ago by someone who clearly was not the ancient Egyptians. Not only that, they built them in far under our estimates for what they could have done, even if they had possessed the technology that we don't have today. It still would have taken them 30 years and far more than double the workforce they had available. Also, they certainly could not have built them to last 5,000 years, as if you've ever seen the pyramids, they clearly have. Now, how were they built? I don't know. Why were they built? I don't know that either. Who built them? I don't know that either. But I can tell you who it wasn't. And it wasn't the ancient Egyptians. With that, what questions do you have?